Hi, and welcome to Systematic Hiring, the series where we unpack what it really takes to move from scattered hiring to structured impact. I'm Kajsa Asplund, lead people science at Alva Labs, and here's today's truth. Hiring is one of the most important levers for business success, but most talent acquisition teams still aren't set up to deliver on that promise. Too often, TA is stuck reacting to urgent hiring needs, working with vague role definitions, and making decisions based on gut feeling. Meanwhile, expectations are rising, and AI is rapidly changing how organizations operate. This gap between how important hiring actually is and how we actually work with it creates real risk. But it also opens up an opportunity. Because this could be the moment where TA really steps up and shifts from being an operational function to a strategic business engine. With me today is someone who's been leading this shift and is still deep in the work of making it happen. He's shaped hiring practices at companies like Klarna, Instabox, Gelato, and more, always working to better connect hiring and real business impact. Mathias Cedervall Timell, Head of People Enablement at Legora. Mathias, so great to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's amazing to have you back here. We know that our followers love hearing what you have to say on this topic. So many of those who are listening are probably familiar with you, but for those who aren't, could you just give us a snapshot of your journey, like how you ended up in this field and how you came to work with hiring the way you do?
I think I came into this field the way that most people come into recruitment, right? Slipping on a banana peel and kind of just ending up there, right? So nobody grows up dreaming of being a recruiter. But for me, it was, in the beginning, it was a lot about finding opportunities for people to be the best version of themselves. But then as time progressed and when I started, I felt like we were taking the wrong approach to everything. And I think that stems from me studying psychology in school and kind of having a very systematic approach for, how do you validate your answers? How do you make sure that you're actually getting the results and that they mean what you think that they mean? And that's the psychology background. And then as time progressed, I realized how broken I thought that things were, right? And so I'm not saying that they are broken. I'm saying that that's my opinion, and that we could do something that was a lot better. And over the course of the past decade and a half, I think that the whole domain has moved towards a much more evidence-based and kind of scientific approach to what it is that we're doing on a day-to-day basis, which I think is the most exciting shift that could ever have happened in a domain like this.
Isn't it? I think there's so much exciting stuff underway, and we're many who are really anticipating this to change on scale, right? Back to your title also, I wanted to ask you about that. You're Head of People Enablement at Legora. That's not the most common title in the TA field. What does that entail, and how does hiring come in?
It's not very common. I think I made it up, actually. But it was more around, like, you could have talent acquisition, but then you're limited to acquiring talent, right? Or you could have HR, but then it's just human resources. I think a way of looking at the entire domain is much more around people enablement. So it's not only about finding the right people, but it's around making sure that expectations around performance are aligned from very early in the recruitment process all the way through to your actual employment, right? And so providing the tools necessary for somebody to be able to succeed in a role is a lot about expectation management, a lot about competence matching. And so people enablement just made sense in terms of an epithet, but I think it really doesn't matter what you call the department that you're working in, but I wanted something that was different than HR or talent acquisition because I thought that we all needed to shift. And also, like, old verbiage carries old connotations, right? And so I don't think, if you Google HR memes, I don't think that the response is going to be overly positive. So just having that mind shift in terms of what we can be and what we should be in terms of a business engine.
I love that. So the shift in title actually also reflects a shift in perspective on what you're there to accomplish, right?
What we hope to accomplish, right? And also the promise that we have to give to the business in terms of, like, here's what we can take accountability for, here's what we can take responsibility for, and I think you need a new name to kind of set that tone.
To be sure. And that's actually a perfect segue into my next question, which is about the fact that the grim reality still looks very different from the ideal we hope to accomplish someday. Why do you think so many talent acquisition teams are still stuck in execution mode?
Because they don't understand what they're hiring for, right? Or the role that they're actually playing. So for me, talent acquisition and recruitment is the most critical part of any organization, because it doesn't matter what you do. It doesn't matter which industry you're in. Like, your business is always going to be composed of and do business with other people, right? So the people that we bring in to do that work is the most critical asset that we have, unless you're drop shipping on Amazon, in which case, like, stop looking at those ads. But I think, for me, if you don't have a good understanding for what the business is out to accomplish, right, you're always going to be stuck in a reactive mode of a hiring manager coming to you and go like, find me 3 new salespeople, or find me a good marketeer within demand generation. It's like, okay, what are they supposed to be doing? What does good look like here? What outcomes are you actually after? It might be the case that we're not supposed to be looking for somebody in demand gen, but product marketing is actually where we're supposed to be. And if we can't, as a people organization, help guide the business in terms of making smart decisions, then we're always going to be a service delivery, right? We're always going to be an afterthought, and kind of like, here's the spec, it's already set, now you go out and find me someone. But you have to involve yourselves earlier in those conversations in order to understand. And so when I recruit for my team, one of the questions that I always try to ask is like, tell me about the business that you're currently working for. Like, what's your customer acquisition cost? What's your go-to-market strategy? Like, do you know what the business is actually about? Or do you only know what you think that a great salesperson looks like? Because that can differ, right? Even within an organization, depending on which customer segment you're going for or whatever. So I think the reason why when TA gets stuck in just service delivery mode, it's because we're not taking accountability for the performance or the outcomes. We're only taking accountability for bringing somebody to a close and then sign the paper, and then it's, the HRBP's problem or whatever. And I think that's a very narrow way to look at it.
Exactly. So I think what's really interesting about that is the idea that as a talent acquisition partner, or as an HR professional in general, you need to really understand the business, right? And what you as a company are there to do in order to be able to, work with people operations and the people issues in a way that's going to, contribute to the business simply. I love that.
I mean, you are the business.
Yeah.
Right? Like, in so many ways, you are the business, which is one of my, and like, people are going to react to this and they're not going to like what I'm saying. But if you're one of those HR professionals that says like, I don't know what the English translation would be, so sorry for this, but like, if you're saying I'm working with affärsnära HR, stop it. Stop it, because all it does is show me that you don't understand what it is that you're doing. There's nobody saying that they're working with business-related sales or business-related market. It's implied, right? But if we're choosing to give ourselves an epithet that forces us to like, we're part of this business, it's like, no. If you're recruiting in for the business and you're managing performance within the business, and if you're making sure that people have the tools that they need in order to succeed in the business, you are a core function of the business. We don't have to say it. We have to show it, and we have to live it, and we have to take accountability for it. And if we can't do that, then we're not affärsnära HR.
Definitely. Here. And let's see what the audience have to say on this subject. So it's time for our first poll, which is, where is your team today? Busy keeping up with hiring needs, optimizing the process, or driving business outcomes? And here we can see that a pretty big majority, 67% say they're busy optimizing the process. A good 21% say they're driving business outcomes.
Good.
And 20%, more or less, 18-20, say they're busy keeping up with hiring needs. What's your take on those results, Mathias?
I think it's really encouraging, right? Like, optimizing the process. If that's where we are and we're past the kind of like defined stage, I think that's absolutely fantastic. Then my question would be like, how sure are you about the fundamentals? Because speaking about every team that I've ever been at, like, the constant reiteration of what does good look like, that takes up most of my time.
Exactly. That's what I was going to say too, that I think there are a few examples out there of TA functions that are optimizing the process, the selection process that is, without perhaps having done the homework of this, what does great look like, right? So we're going to get back to that and the importance of getting that entire sort of cycle or loop right. But first, I want to double click on what you were alluding to earlier, Mathias, when it comes to having to call yourself strategic, perhaps, because you're not really there. So one of the questions we hear all the time from our customers is, how do I get TA a strategic seat at the table? What's your take on that?
You earn it, right? Like, no, just like any seat at any table. And the number one, I think you have to ask yourself, like, where is the table? Do I need to be there? Do I have representatives in my managers or my reporting line that can speak for me in those settings, right? But number two, you have to earn it. So I think last time when you and I spoke, we were talking about, like, if you have a management team and the CFO only comes in and only ever wants to talk about the finances, but never participates in any other discussion, right? You would change that CFO, right? That person would no longer be in that job. It's too narrow. So if you want to come, you have to show that you have a bigger understanding for what are we trying to achieve as a company. That means that you have to go out into the business and acquire that information, because it's nobody's job description to keep you in the loop on everything that's going on, right? So you have to be ridiculously curious about all the stuff that's going on in the business. Number two, you have to show that based on that information, you can put processes and strategies in place that enables that leads us towards that outcome. Now, if you don't do that and you're just waiting around and saying, like, I should be in that room, it's like, with today's business climate, I don't think that we can afford ever in any company to not bring the right people into the room, right? So it's not, you have to ask, like, what value would I actually contribute with there, and how narrow is my scope? And if it's too narrow for me to have a seat at that table, and I really want one, right? Then how can I increase my scope? How can I take more accountability? How can I contribute with more value up until the point where everybody around me is like, yeah, well, we won't have this discussion without Kajsa, right? Like, we simply, like, this meeting is not going to take place unless I have her in the room, because I need her ideas into this. And so I think there are two ways of looking at it. Either, like, this should be status quo, and then you can mope about the fact that it's not, or you can try to be the change that you want to see, and that probably requires a lot of hard work to get to a solid understanding and a more fundamental understanding of what is it that we're trying to accomplish, and what is my role in accomplishing that look like.
Exactly. So taking on a broader scope, understanding the bigger picture of the business, basically. But there's also, I guess, another side to taking on a bigger scope, which is to actually go out on a limb and say that you're prepared to own a few really hard KPIs, right? And to be responsible for those KPIs being where they should be. I remember last time we spoke, you said something to the effect of, heads roll all the time in sales, in marketing, in product, etc. Because if you are accountable in those parts of the business, then you are accountable for the actual KPIs, right? Right. So is there something here as well where TA needs to sort of go out on a limb a bit more?
I think HR needs to go out on a limb even more, right? And take accountability for performance to a much greater extent, right? If we're responsible for putting the processes in place that bring people into the business, and then we're also responsible for creating the framework for which we evaluate performance, and that performance is not where we want it to be based on the process that we brought people in from, then we're not doing our jobs, right? And so I think you can look at the data. It's actually it's really interesting if you look at attrition in, like, sales departments, marketing departments, where you have really solid kind of, like, you have very clear KPIs in terms of, like, what does good look like and what is it that we need to reach as a business, and HR is not accountable in that way, right? Because people consider it to be fluffy, or kind of like it's only tied into culture, and that's how we do things, or how people feel it. But that's not true, right? Most of this stuff is quantifiable. If you, to get very kind of specific, if you run a recruitment process and you've done your entire work of kind of like defining and assessing and aligning what good looks like, you bring somebody in, and then you start having probation check-ins. So I usually try to run a 1 month, a 3 month, and a 5 month probation check-in with kind of like, we gather up the data. We have a conversation between the manager and the employee. We make sure that we're on track. And if we're not on track, we're able to take measures pretty quickly in order to go like, okay, well, you don't have all the tools, or you haven't gotten everything that you need, or maybe this is not a fit and we made a mistake from both sides, right? There's a reality in there as well. But I think if we don't put anything like that in the process, if we don't put a kind of like validation method, are we doing the right things? Are the people that we're bringing in as a TA function, if you want to call it that, are they actually performing the way that we're evaluating them to perform? If I have a full scorecard of just 4s and then I bring somebody in that doesn't make probation, something's wrong with my process, right? Like we have a process and we're judging against a certain criteria, and then that person isn't successful. Then there's a discrepancy between what I'm trying to assess and my ability to actually assess it. And then you have to go really deep. Now you have to sit down with the entire organization and try to figure out, like, where's the discrepancy here? Because obviously we're doing something wrong. But if you don't put those things in place, if you don't have accountability for performance of the people that you're bringing in, then you're only providing a process, in which case you probably shouldn't be at the table. Right?
Exactly. So I'm guessing this also involves having the confidence, or mustering up the confidence to actually push back when stuff is not done on par with your expectations or according to the metrics that they should be, etc., in the organization. So what's your experience there? How does the organization react when you push back on, for instance, promotion rates or patterns of ratings in interviews and stuff?
So usually when you go out, and because we're all on the same team, right? Like everybody at any company, we all want the same thing. And if you're good enough at explaining your perspective on what it is that you want to fix, because you're doing it for them, right? Like, but we all want the success of the individuals and in continuation, the business as a whole, right? So if you're pushing back, but one of the fundamental things that I always try to instill in all of my hiring managers is like, hiring is not an admin burden. It's not something that you do on the side. It's the most important part of your job as a manager. And then you pause for dramatic effect, and then you go, it's the most important part of your job as a manager, because the people that we bring into the business, they have impact in perpetuity, right? For as long as they're with us. And you as a manager, you're not here to fix problems. You're not here to fix your problem scope. You're here to build a team that fixes that problem scope. Because otherwise we're constrained to your 40 or however many hours you work in a week, right? And I don't want to be constrained to one individual. I want to have a team. I want to have fallbacks. I want to have redundancies, right? So you need to build up a team full of good, competent people that can solve this problem for us as a business. And that means that the people that you bring into that team, that's the most crucial thing that you're doing on a daily cadence. And then, you know, I have so many colleagues and so many peers, and I have been chasing hiring managers around going like, please submit the scorecards, please provide the feedback. And it's like, okay, well, if they're not, then probably our admin burden is too high and we need to look over the scorecards, right? Or we need to buy an ATS that can automatically populate the scorecards with AI. Like, there's so many tools out there, but it's not about the process in and of itself, but it's the joint buy-in that we have. Is like, this is the most crucial thing that we do as a company, because these are the people that we're going to be spending always, like, more time than we're going to do with our significant others and or with our families. Like, this has implications for our business in perpetuity. And if you don't buy in with me on that, then we have a major issue in terms of priorities, and we need to set that straight. If you're in TA or HR and you don't think that your job is the most important part of the business, then you're in the wrong place. And if you're in engineering and you don't think that engineering is the most important part of the business, you're in the wrong place, right? And so, like, we have to stand up with the same level of confidence as every other department does and go like, here's our contribution towards the common goal that we're going to be reaching together. And if we can't say that with a straight back and a straight face, then the uphill battle is going to be really tough.
To be sure. And I'm sure there are loads of people out there who can recognize themselves and see that, yes, I'm one of those people who thinks that this is the most important thing, but I still haven't, I haven't gotten the buy-in, I haven't earned the position maybe. Where can you start doing things differently to address this? I know, for instance, that you use the term talent bar for something you need to sort of reconsider.
Well, so I think there needs to be a talent bar for every organization. Kind of like, where do we hire into? Usually, depending a little bit on which research you read, like that talent bar can be placed at like 80%. We're only hiring into the top 20% in terms of performance in the company. But then comes the next question, right? So like, well, how do you define where 80% goes? And now we have to be really tactical around this, right? So what we have to do is we have to go back to the basics and we have to create a career framework. That's the start of everything. So you have a competency framework and that matches against a salary framework, and that together constitutes your career framework. That forms the basis for everything that you do, right? Both in terms of performance and hiring, because that competency framework is going to feed directly into your scorecards. Because if we're not recruiting for the same, if we're not assessing the same things in recruitment as we're judging performance on, what the hell are we doing, right? So you tie that into the scorecards, and then you make sure that your performance cycles measure the exact same things. And that's how you tie the whole thing together. And like, I'm saying this now and just pointing my fingers in the air. This is ridiculously hard, right? It's ridiculously hard. And when you're trying to do it, you will find pretty quickly that like reality doesn't fit into a framework, and it never does, right? But you have to be able to sit down and explain this vision for kind of like, this is how we're going to do it. And this is also how we're going to provide structure to our employees. This is how we're going to provide them with a career path. This is how we're going to make sure that they understand what's expected of them. This is how we're going to talk around performance with them. And once you start providing all of that and make managers' jobs easier, not heavier with the admin burden, like when you provide them the framework and go like, here's what you need to do. This is a solid way to start talking about performance with your employees based on everything that we've recruited them in through. If you don't get people aligned with you, then I don't know what they're expecting. But that's like, you're so far ahead of everybody else. And again, like, this is the most complicated stuff you can do, trying to pull all of this in together to have a holistic framework. And I'm not saying that I've ever accomplished like the end state of this, but that has to be the general idea or what we're targeting towards, because otherwise we're narrowing our scope to a small part of the process and refusing to take accountability for anything that happens on the back end of it. And then we're just a service function.
Exactly. And I think that's actually the perfect segue into our next section about how to actually build this system, because a common denominator for all organizations who are well on their way to achieving this is that they employ a system, right? And you build some kind of loop for how hiring is supposed to work to take the guesswork out of it. So at Alva, we usually talk about define, assess, decide, and then improve. And I know you have a framework of your own that's quite similar, but still involves a couple more steps. Can you tell us about that?
Let's also just reiterate the fact that it's similar because I stole yours, right? And then I reiterated on it. But I also have, so after define, assess, I have alignment, because I'm working with a process rather than developing a product. So I need alignment with the people that are involved in this process. And then at the very end, I have reiteration, right? So that just like the stuff that we want to improve on, I go back and I make sure that everybody in the recruitment process are okay with like, okay, well, looks like in our performance framework, people are scoring lower on whatever skill it is that we're assessing in our scorecards. So we're changing the questions that we have in the scorecards in order to assess this. And then I want to make sure that everybody is aligned in terms of what are we changing and why. So that's a 6-step process, but I think it's less about the actual process and the steps, and it's more around the fact that like, are you measuring outcomes? Are you trying to figure out whether or not you have construct validity in your pipeline? Like, what you're trying to assess, is that happening? Or are you, so when I started recruitment, it was gung-ho and like gut feeling all the time. You stepped in and you took a competence profile meeting with a hiring manager, and they were like, find me some smart people. And it's like, okay. Any particular B2B sales background? Like, what do you want? And then they walked out of there and they were like, no, I don't have a great feeling about this person. It's like, okay, on to the next. But you don't know what it is that you're supposed to be looking for if you can't validate this with data, right? So like, what does good look like across multiple dimensions? How do we score that? How do we evaluate that? And are we sure that what we're trying to evaluate is actually commensurate to the performance in retrospect? And in order for us to do that, we have to measure performance on the back end to see, like, were we right? Like, are we asking the right questions? That's your golden data set, right? But if you don't close that loop going back, or if you don't have the ambition of closing that loop going back, then the process, no matter how many steps you put into it, it doesn't make sense. It's about taking accountability and making sure that everybody's on the same page in terms of what are we trying to do here? What's the end state? Because if it's just filling bums and seats, your process will look vastly different than if you're trying to achieve something of massive strategic importance that requires a specific competence and skill.
Exactly.
Skills.
Exactly. So connecting these different bits and pieces together, right? And let's hear from the audience. Where does your hiring loop break down? Is it the definition stage, no clear definition of success, weak assessment methods, decisions made on gut feel, no feedback loop or iteration, or all of the above? And let's see, a clear winner here is no clear definition of success at 37%. At number 2, we have no feedback loop. And then it's a close tie between weak assessment methods and all of the above. Decisions made on gut feel, actually pretty far down. So, Mathias, did you expect no clear definition of success to come out on top?
Yes. Right? That's the problem. And I'm still there, right? Like, I think we're all there. And I think that's why you need to define what good looks like, not only for being able to identify it, but also how do you measure that on the back end?
Yeah, exactly.
And I think the worst part of this, I was having this discussion with an industry peer the other day who's much smarter than I am and has reached much further. I won't say his name because he's never going to let me forget it. But and his whole take on kind of like the thing was, the worst part about hiring manager gut feelings is that they're usually right, right? So like, because then if you're going through an entire recruitment process and somebody's gut feeling and then that person turns out to be a star, right? But it's like, yeah, but that hiring manager also had an incentive to make sure to give all the tools, right? That's a confounding variable, number one. Number two, if that gut feeling turned out to be right, I have no way of replicating that when I'm looking for another star player, right? Like, there's no way. I just have to push a lot of people into the hiring manager pipeline. So it's about scalability in the end, right? And I think it's a very funny way to look at it, but like, if gut feelings turn out to be right, but they're not replicable, then we can't use them in a system. And if we don't have a hiring system, then all we have is a TA function who's just doing pre-screens and then pushing forward. And then we're pipeline managers, and that's no fun.
Exactly. Exactly. And you've talked a lot already about how to create accountability in the organization, because obviously this is not something that you can do on your own, right? You need to have the hiring managers with you. You need to have management with you, obviously. And you've mentioned the importance of providing a clear rationale, obviously, that this is the most important thing you're doing as a hiring manager, and also to provide them with very clear frameworks. Do you think those are the most important ingredients to bring hiring managers on board and get their accountability, or is there something else that you need to think of?
That's a very good question. I think it goes back to like, what's at your company, what's the definition of a manager, right? Like, what are the expectations of managers, right? Because I think the whole discussion, I've very seldom, and that might be because I choose to work or I'm attracted to organizations where like the growth and is obviously a big part of the agenda, but I've never experienced like an issue in getting hiring managers excited about hiring, right? Because I think, and that might be because of the settings that I've been in, but I think if that's where you have the problem, then you have to be bold enough to question whether or not that person should be a manager. Because if you're not excited about bringing new people in, building out your team, making sure that you have the right competencies to address your problem scope, then that person might not be suitable to be leading that group of people, right? And I think that's a fair question. Not everybody should be managers, right?
Exactly.
That's not, but if we can't call it out, and if we find the same problem consistently, like the definition of insanity is keep doing the same thing and expecting different results. But I've never had that issue. But I think you need to go back to kind of like, as a manager, what is your responsibility and what is your accountability here? And if you can't get them excited about growing their team, then I would question their priorities.
Exactly. I love that. Looking into the crystal ball now a little bit, I think we can all feel the tectonic shift happening in AI at the moment. I mean, this has been underway for a long time. You're definitely front stage at Legora, but now I think the development has come to a stage where a lot of us can feel that stuff is really starting to happen, right? And this is affecting the way we work, it's affecting the job market, and so on. How do you think this development will affect TA and the potential of this systematic hiring approach?
I'm going to be so egoistic now. It's like, for me, the biggest shift has been, like, I'm not a numbers guy, right? I've always leaned very heavily on other people with analytical capability internally when I need to kind of like present cases or do whatever. I now have a numbers guy in any chosen LLM, right? Like, that's the coolest thing for me, because it opened up a whole new venue when I can sit around and play around with the numbers and see kind of like, okay, well, would this make sense or would this make sense? You also have a sparring partner who, like, I use AI a lot as a sparring partner before I go to my sparring partners to kind of like have something that's more prepared or an even more elaborated thought. I think the shift is that we can all become much more analytical, because most people that are in our domain do not come from an analytical background, right? That's just the way that it goes. And we now all have that at the reach of our fingertips, which I think is really cool for everybody who hasn't tried it yet. And then there are certain models that are more suited to that, but like, you can figure that out for yourself. But then on the back end of that, I also think that there's an inherent trap here. For example, like, one thing that would be really easy is to create a job architecture, so a competence framework and a salary framework based on data input from any given LLM, right? But that probably won't rhyme very well with your organization, right? So there's always a lot of crafting for the specifics, and you can provide the context and prompts till the cows come home, but it probably won't. But you still have to take this and you have to align it with hiring managers. And so even when you have it, like, you have to go out to the business and make sure that, do we all agree on this? Do we all think that this is the best way that we're going to be doing this hiring spree or whatever it can be? And so we need to lean into it. We need to use it for all of the stuff that we don't have in our competence box right now, because we no longer have to add an extra headcount for it, right? Like, if we get good enough at doing it, then we won't need to ask for that extra headcount for just the analytics. We probably should anyways, but still, like, that's the coolest thing for me. That's how it's enabled me to a much greater extent. I think that I'm a better professional for it.
Fantastic. I think you said to me previously that what you would like to say to all TA professionals is that you just got 120% better. Just go out and use it, right?
And I think dare to use it, right? Like, I know a fair share of people at my current company who are fantastic at utilizing AI. And so I sit down next to them, right? Like, here's my problem. Here's what I'm trying to do. And they sometimes look at me as if I'm born under a rock, and that's fine, right? I'm not going to get better unless I get that expert advice. But odds are you have somebody pretty close to you that can help you out with it. And I think that goes for, like, the whole thing that we're talking about today, right? So just try. Just start, because otherwise this entire thing is going to run away from you. It's a lot of work and it's really complicated, but you have to start it for a number of reasons, right? Just like the clarity of what you can bring to the table, the structure that you can provide towards the strategic agenda for the company as a whole. And I think most importantly, you're going to enjoy it so much more, right? It's so much more fun sitting on the insights and being able to guide and provide that guidance for an organization. I mean, that's why I do what I do. And I'm not particularly good at it. I think I just have a relentless curiosity in trying to be a little bit better at what I do every single day. And that has manifested itself in an increased scope all the time because I'm willing to take accountability for it.
Yeah.
And I think that's the most important thing when it comes to AI adoption or growing the strategic agenda for TA or whatever you want to call it. I think just like go out on a limb, put your head on the chopping block.
Hear, hear. And let's now hear from the audience. Where do you stand on AI use in talent acquisition? We're using it actively, curious but haven't started, or skeptical and unsure where to begin. And here we have a whopping 63%, right? Or at least 60% saying that we're using it already. And then we have about 30% saying curious but haven't started. And only, I think, 3% saying that we're skeptical or unsure about where to begin. So that's pretty promising.
Very promising. Really cool. And I think like a lot of the ATSs or even some of the HRS ISs out there right now are implementing AI into their product features in a very kind of like cool way, right? Where it makes sense. But I think you have to be mindful about where are you as an organization and does this make sense for us? There's a lot of the screening tools out there, for example, that somebody's going to shoot me for this, but like I'm very skeptical against those because I trust human intuition. I trust well-experienced recruiters to make that judgment. And I think if you're leaving that up to AI, you're probably going to find yourself in a deep hole and trying to explain to a lot of people why you chose to do it. So like in some places it will make a lot of sense. In other places, so automated transcription of interviews that populates the scorecards to then go in and actually fill them out yourself, lessening admin burden throughout the recruitment process. No brainer, right? Like do it today because it'll remove friction from the process. That makes sense. Screening CVs with the help of AI and basing your judgment completely on that. If you want my opinion, for whatever it counts for, probably not a great idea. But that's me.
Probably also a regulatory risk these days, right?
Yeah.
So really great insights, Mathias. Now let's see if we have some exciting questions from the audience. I am sure we do. So first of all, we have, you have to, as a person, be really strong in stakeholder management, business understanding, and influence skills. Okay, so that was more of a comment. Yes, I think we can definitely agree on that. Let's see what else we've got down here. Ingvild asks, we're unfortunately stuck in a large international ATS system where AI is not present yet, and we have no influence on it. What do you say to that, Mathias? Where do you start in that situation?
Well, if you don't have it in the ATS system, you can still utilize it for, like, you probably have an ATS system that employs scorecards, right? So like just the scorecard creation, going back to creating your competence framework, you can implement it in other places. If you're stuck in a tech stack that doesn't allow for AI implementation, that sucks. Let's call a spade, right? So like that sucks, but that doesn't mean that you can't implement it in everything else that you're doing. And if you're thinking about your performance framework, right? That's not going to live in your ATS system. That's going to live in your HRIS system. And so there's always venues when you can plug it in, but mostly it's around like getting better ideas. Like you said, referring to what I said, like everybody just got like 120% better and 120% more efficient if we utilize it correctly. And I think the only way that we reach that is just like start trying. It's not that scary.
Exactly. Just start trying. I think that's a great sum of it all. Let's see what else we've got here. Amanda asks, how can we navigate and take a bigger responsibility in strategic recruitment and be involved in the business in a hierarchical company? I think it's supposed to be, right? Okay, so in a business with a strict hierarchy, Mathias, do you think there's, how can you think about navigating that environment?
So I think most organizations, even the ones that claim to be completely flat organizations with self-management, has a hierarchy, right? So like this is not, it's not but the way that the question is phrased, like very, very hierarchical organization, I'm guessing that this is a structural problem more than anything. But my answer will be the same. It's just like, prove your worth. Come with the ideas. Nobody in today's business climate can afford not to listen to great ideas. If you ask anybody in my team, like 90% of my ideas are completely stupid and they shoot it down very, very quickly, which is why I have a great team around me. But then there are those 10% that could potentially be game changers. That could be the kind of like 200 IQ thing to do. And I love it when the rest of my team goes out on the same limb and it's like, we should be doing this. Because that is something that even if you have a very hierarchical organization, like if you bring that to management or just to your stakeholders, like begin digging where you stand, and you manage to just implement one change and then one more change and then one more change. And then before you know it, you will have a recruitment process or a performance process or whatever it is that you can be really, really proud of. That's world class, right? It's not like it's not about shooting cannonballs. It's the small gunshots that like just one after another, and then you'll find yourself in a completely different place in 6 months.
Exactly. So keep at it, keep floating ideas, and take accountability. That's the recipe for it. And what else have we got here? I think we have time for one more question at least. Anna is asking, how can we encourage stronger ownership and accountability from hiring managers and move away from a plug-and-play mindset and hire for potential? Right, so perhaps a voice from the kind of organization, Mathias, where you've spent a lot of time optimizing the process without not really thinking about the pieces that come before and after.
Super tough question then, right? So like, I don't have the answer, mostly because I don't have the context. So like the plug and play mentality usually stems from like a stressful situation where you're losing somebody and you have to, like, you're dependent on that competence, right? And so like in some cases, a plug and play recruitment is exactly what you need to do as a business, right? And so I'm not saying that mentality is always bad, because there's a place and time for everything, right? I think the beginning of that question was how can we demand accountability?
Yes,
or
how can we encourage stronger ownership and accountability?
You demand it, right? You demand it. You say this is your responsibility as a manager to kind of like own this, take care of this, make sure that you work with me on the competence profile. You make sure that we align everything that it is that we want. You put together strong scorecards so that we can have an objective assessment of these candidates, and then you provide the tools for this person to be successful in the business, and I will provide you with the process to measure that so that we can ensure together that we've done it correctly, right? Like, you demand accountability the same way that you're stepping in and taking accountability, but you can't demand accountability from a manager without taking some yourself, right? So like, you give me what you need, I will build a process for you, and then we'll evaluate it together, and then we'll figure out where we went wrong or right together, and then we can replicate it, right? Or refine it, or whatever it can be. So if you step in and you take accountability, then at least in my mind, oversimplifying it naturally, but like, then you have the right to demand accountability back. And I think it's only when we step up to the plate and say like, I will own this, but then I'm expecting you to own this. And I think that's fair. And then we're playing for the same team, right? We want the same things. That's the important part to remember. I think everybody wants to run a successful recruitment process and have the new A+ player in the business, right? That's the end goal. The only question is, how do we get there? And if we're not experts in answering that question, then we can't expect hiring managers to answer, but what this could look like, right? So it's joint accountability. We share it.
I love that. I think that's such an inspiring message, that start with you, start with what you can take accountability for, and big things might happen. Fantastic. This has been such an inspiring conversation. If you're serious about turning TA into a business engine, here are 3 moves to make this quarter. Number 1, pressure test your career framework. You probably have one, but can every hiring manager articulate what great looks like for their roles using it? Pick one team, sit down with the manager, and check if your framework actually guides decisions or just lives in a deck. Number 2, make accountability explicit on your next hire. Before you start, sit down with the hiring manager and agree. We both own this outcome. In 6 months, we'll review together whether this worked and what could have been done differently. Write it down. And last but not least, number 3, run your first performance loop and act on it. After some months, ask, is this person performing as expected? What did we miss? And then critically, trace it back to your interview data and adjust your process accordingly. A feedback loop isn't real until it changes how you hire. So small shifts create system change. Start narrow, own the outcomes, and let the wins expand. Thank you so much, Mathias, for joining us.
Thank you.
And episode 4 of Systematic Hiring has come to a close. Thank you everyone for watching.
And I didn't curse. Not once.
Not once.
Fantastic.